When we imagine pioneers crossing the American frontier in the 1800s, we often picture danger from storms, wild animals, or attacks. But for many settlers, the deadliest enemy was far more ordinary: summer heat. Crossing the Great Plains or deserts in July could mean days of temperatures soaring past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And unlike us, the pioneers had no air conditioning, no electric fans, no refrigerated bottles of water. They had wagons, cloth, animals, and the barest of tools. So the question is, how did they do it? How did families manage to travel hundreds of miles across baking plains and deserts without collapsing? The answer is a story of ingenuity, tradition, and sheer endurance. In this video, we'll explore the practical methods pioneers used to stay cool, or at least to avoid deadly heat stroke, during their long treks westward. From clever shelters and clothing choices to food, drink, and survival tricks, we'll step into the sweltering shoes of those who braved the frontier sun. Let's begin with shelter, because in the 1800s, shade could be a matter of life and death. On the trail, a covered wagon wasn't just a moving home. It was also the pioneers' best defense against the sun. The white canvas stretched over curved wooden bows could reflect some sunlight, and many travelers improvised awnings by extending the fabric outward with poles, creating patches of shade for rest stops. Travel journals describe how wagon trains would halt at midday, when the heat was worst, and circle the wagons. Families would sit or lie in the shade cast by canvas flaps, conserving strength. In treeless prairies, a wagon's narrow shadow might be the only relief available. But when pioneers settled, they turned to other methods. One of the most effective was the sod house. Built from blocks of prairie turf, these sod items had walls thick as 2 feet, which kept interiors remarkably cool in summer. Visitors often wrote of stepping from blistering plains into rooms that felt almost chilly, the damp soil absorbing heat. Where timber was available, log cabins with deep porches also provided shade. And when trees were scarce, settlers planted fast-growing cottonwoods or willows near their homes specifically to shield against summer sun. Cooling was rarely comfortable by modern standards. It was survival, creating just enough shade to prevent collapse. Now, let's talk clothing. Modern intuition says the lighter and thinner, the better, and pioneers often did wear loose-fitting cotton or linen shirts and dresses in summer. Breathable fabrics let sweat evaporate, cooling the body. Wide-brimmed straw hats, homemade or purchased from trading posts, shaded the face and neck. Women sometimes stitched bonnets with long fabric brims, protecting skin from sunburn. But here's where it gets interesting. Not all pioneers abandoned wool, even in the heat. Some historians suggest wool clothing, though heavier, offered protection from the sun's direct rays and even insulated the body against extreme heat. Shepherds in hot Mediterranean regions had long worn wool for this reason, and many immigrants brought those traditions west. A thin layer of wool could keep skin cooler than direct sun exposure. Another factor was modesty. 19th century dress codes meant women were expected to cover arms and ankles, even in sweltering weather. Light-colored fabrics helped, but pioneers often endured layers that today would feel unbearable. Surviving journals mention rolling up sleeves when possible, or children being allowed to strip down to underclothes in the worst heat. So while clothing provided some relief, it was also a reminder. Culture and survival sometimes clashed on the frontier. Staying cool wasn't only about shade and clothes, it was also about what you ate and drank. Water was, of course, the most critical. Streams, springs, and rivers were lifelines. Pioneers filled barrels or wooden kegs, but water quickly grew warm and stale. One ingenious solution was the clay jug. Porous earthenware allowed a small amount of water to seep to the surface and evaporate, cooling the contents inside. Even in desert heat, Water from a clay jug could taste refreshingly cool compared to a sealed barrel. Milk and butter were harder to preserve. Some settlers dug shallow, cool pits in shaded ground, lining them with grass or cloth soaked in water to slow spoilage. Streams could also serve as makeshift refrigerators. Buckets of milk or meat lowered into running water to keep them cool for a few precious hours. Food itself shifted in hot weather. Heavy meals of salted pork or beans were avoided in the worst heat. Instead, pioneers ate lighter: bread, dried fruit, or whatever fresh vegetables could be scavenged or grown. Eating less reduced the strain on the body in extreme temperatures. And when ice was available, for some wealthier frontier towns, ice cut from winter lakes was stored in sawdust-insulated ice houses, sometimes lasting deep into summer. But for wagon trains and isolated settlers, that luxury was rare. Most pioneers simply relied on cool water and lighter fare. Beyond shelter, clothing, and food, pioneers relied on clever tricks to fight the heat. One of the simplest and most effective was evaporation. Travelers would soak cloths or bandanas in water and drape them around their necks or over their heads. As the moisture evaporated, it created a cooling effect, lowering body temperature just enough to stave off heat stroke. Children, especially, were often wrapped in damp cloth during the hottest hours. Another method was sleeping outdoors. On suffocating nights, families sometimes abandoned stifling cabins or wagons to rest beneath the open sky. The prairie cooled rapidly after sunset, and a blanket spread on the ground might offer more comfort than a packed wagon bed. Of course, this came with risks: insects, snakes, and sudden storms. But when the air inside grew unbearable, the open plains were the only relief. Settlers also dug what were sometimes called cool pits. A shallow trench or hole, shaded and lined with damp cloth, could be used to store food, rest briefly, or shield children from the sun. In some accounts, women placed newborns in these shaded hollows during fieldwork, keeping them cool while adults labored in the heat. And of course, whenever streams or rivers appeared, pioneers took advantage. Washing hands and faces, wetting clothes, or simply soaking their feet provided immediate relief. Some wagon trains even scheduled travel near water crossings for this reason, using the stops to refresh both people and animals. None of these tricks eliminated the heat, but each offered a margin of survival, small but vital in an environment where miscalculation could be fatal. For all their ingenuity, pioneers still faced serious dangers from summer heat. Heat stroke was poorly understood in the 1800s, but its symptoms were familiar. Travelers described companions collapsing suddenly, skin hot and flushed, pulse racing. Without treatment, rest in shade, cooling, and water, death could come quickly. Children and the elderly were especially vulnerable. Dehydration, too, claimed lives. Streams might dry up or wells turn brackish. On desert crossings like the infamous 40-mile desert in Nevada, emigrants sometimes ran out of water entirely. Diaries tell of oxen dropping dead by the trail, their carcasses littering the sand, while desperate families pressed on with parched lips and swollen tongues. Some mistakes were avoidable, but only with experience. Drinking too much stagnant water could cause dysentery. Eating heavy, salty meals in the heat could worsen dehydration. And pressing forward at midday rather than resting often led to tragedy. One emigrant in 1850 wrote simply, "We lost 2 to the sun. They lay down and could not rise again." These accounts remind us that survival wasn't guaranteed. The frontier demanded constant vigilance, and even seasoned pioneers sometimes paid the price for misjudging the heat.
What can we learn from the way pioneers coped with summer heat? First, it highlights the resilience of ordinary people. These settlers didn't have modern conveniences, yet they found ways, through shade, fabrics, clay jugs, and simple water, to endure conditions that could easily have killed them. Second, many of their methods remain relevant today. Evaporative cooling, for example, is still used in parts of the world where air conditioning is scarce. Clay water vessels, known as olla de barro in Spanish tradition, continued to keep water cool without electricity. And the practice of working in the early morning, resting at midday, and resuming in the evening mirrors time-tested strategies in hot climates across the globe. The cultural impact is subtler. Heat survival shaped daily rhythms of pioneer life: when to travel, when to rest, how to build, what to wear. It forged habits of caution and endurance that defined the pioneer spirit, not as reckless adventuring, but as calculated survival in a harsh environment. Picture it. The sun finally dips low, and the prairie breathes out its heat. A man wipes sweat from his brow, watching the horizon glow red. Children laugh faintly as the air cools, chasing one another barefoot in the dust. A woman kneels by a clay jug, pouring cool water into tin cups. The oxen rest at last, steam rising from their flanks. Another day survived, another mile behind them. For the pioneers of the 1800s, summer heat was an adversary as real as storms or hunger. Yet through patience, ingenuity, and sheer endurance, they kept moving west, day after sweltering day, until the horizon opened into new beginnings.